welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Josh Berger.
And I'm Brian Lomax. And today, Josh and I are going to discuss a model for driving intentional practice. We think this is a great topic for not only coaches, but also for players and maybe even other athletes who are often practicing on their own. They may have to plan out their own practice or maybe need some improvement in planning practice. And this model of intentional practice that we're going to be talking about comes from Dan Abrahams. So Dan Abrahams is a sports psychologist in the UK, former professional golfer. He's done a lot of work in soccer, especially at the English Premier League level, but certainly below that as well. And very well respected. Has a great podcast called The Sports Psych Show. Tends to be more on the academic and theory side of things, but it's if you're interested in that kind of thing, it's a wonderful podcast to listen to. I've listened to many episodes and learned a ton from Dan and his guests. So we are going to explore this framework. It's called the 4 I's, and I think as we've said in past episodes, people in psychology and sports psychology like to use acronyms or cute little ways of naming things. And here we are again. We've got another one, the 4 I's. And we're going to go through each one of these. The 4 I's are interest, intense, internalize, and integrated. Obviously, all of those need some explanation, and we'll provide that. So before we get into that and a little bit of a primer on deliberate practice, Josh, I just want to open it up to you to get some initial thoughts that you have on today's topic and who this could be for, the utility of it, etc.
I think it's a really important topic. Obviously, every player practices at some degree, right? Tennis is not a sport I don't know if there's any sport I can really think of where you just compete without really practicing. But obviously, tennis is a sport that requires a good bit of training and practice to get to a level where you can adequately play or compete. And but I think the way that we do that matters. And I think a lot of times people, especially kids, as they're growing up, or maybe whether it's their parent or whether it's a coach, they're more so just following along in terms of the adult who is structuring how what they're going to do out there that day. But I think there are plenty of situations come up where people do have to either fend for themselves or make decisions around their practice. So I think for all sorts of players, it can be helpful, right, to make sure that you're getting the most out of your time on the practice court, but also for coaches, right, thinking about how, I think what these 4 I's can do is it can provide a framework for designing practice, but also for parents, right? Parents to either help their kid, help their kids to make sure that they're maximizing that time during practice, really getting the most out of it, and also just being able to be aware of maybe what to look for when choosing a coach or deciding on where their children are going to play. So I think that it could definitely apply to a number of different people, and excited to dive into this topic.
Great. So, we should probably distinguish, and you touched on this a little bit, Josh, intentional versus, whether we call it non-intentional or maybe a bit mindless, or we're just kind of attending the practice. We may not be fully present, but we're there. We're going through the motions. That might be at one end of the spectrum, and then intentional being at the other, and probably people are going to be traversing that continuum at different times in their careers or even day to day. I think one of the things that intentional practice leans on is some of the work, not only in flow with Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, but also on deliberate practice. And that term was really popularized through Malcolm Gladwell's work, in which he brought out this idea of the 10,000 hour rule. That work was based on the research of Anders Ericsson, and the idea of deliberate practice was something that he came up with studying expert performers in various fields chess, violin, other athletic type pursuits. And I think, when we hear that 10,000 hour rule, because I think it's always quoted back to us, Josh, by parents and coaches. And as if it's, a very specific number one must hit. But, when you read Erickson's work, a book I would recommend to people if they're interested in that is the book Peak, Peak, explains a lot of this. And when you look at the actual research, the span of hours goes from anywhere, to achieve mastery, goes anywhere from 4,000 to 40,000. And it more or less depends on the activity and the person. And then the whole idea of deliberate practice is, the idea was, let's say we'll go with the 10,000, the Malcolm Gladwell thing. So 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. If you're just sort of attending practice and going through the motions, you don't get to clock an hour for that. That like doesn't really count, or maybe a portion of it does, right? So this idea of 10,000 hours isn't just like clocking time on the court and all of a sudden you're a master of it. There has to be this, as is in this model, there has to be especially some internalization and integration of what you're doing, and then having a plan on that. So I think that it's good to understand that piece about deliberate practice. It's more than just showing up. It's having a plan. And then the whole idea of today is to go through some components of planning and reflection that can help all of us be better. So, Josh, I'll introduce the first one, and then maybe you can do the second and the fourth. I'll do the first and the third. So the first I, the letter I, is interest. So what does that mean? When designing a practice, whether it's for ourselves or for some students, the activity should be of interest. It should hold the attention of the player. It should be something that you want to work on or they want to work on for themselves. Something that they know can kind of further along their tennis project. Maybe there's a bit of fun involved. It doesn't always have to be, but that's something that we can modulate in our plans. Maybe we add more fun in sometimes, but maybe it's more on the, where we're really focused on a particular thing that's very interesting for your game. So we want to make sure that it's like for your game. Hey, this is why we're working on it. This is why you want to really get good at that. In your experience as a coach and a sports psychology professional, Josh, what might be some things you'd advise people on the interest side of things as they build a practice plan?
It's a good question. I think it's a couple different factors. I think, novelty is one piece, right? Making sure that it's not always the same, adding in that novel piece, that new piece into a practice, right? Making sure that, things that there's some sort of variety. But I think that doesn't necessarily mean that things have to be radically different, right? I mean, focusing on the fundamentals and doing those fundamentals really well is key. I think back to there's a great video from Kobe Bryant where he talks, it's a video of a reporter who was talking about his conversations with Kobe, and he he said, "Hey, Kobe, I really want to learn how you do, why you're one of the best players in the world." And Kobe said, "Okay, great. If you could spend a day with me, I'll meet you in the gym at 4 a.m." And he said, "Okay, so I guess that's how it's going to be." So he meets him there, and he sees Kobe, essentially, working on layups and short jump shots and things like that, working on the type of things that maybe a middle school or high school team would work on, right? Not necessarily super advanced, super complex things at practice. And, he sort of came to this conclusion that Kobe was who he was and had the success that he did because of sort of that mastery of those fundamentals, right? It's not always a matter of doing things that are always advanced, and I'm sure there is a place for that. But I think the same is certainly true in tennis, right? So when it comes to this first bullet point, I think we can make the fundamentals interesting. We can, you can hit a forehand from all different positions in the court. You could hit a forehand flat. You could hit it with topspin. You can hit it more of a, driving forehand, more of an aggressive shot, but still with spin. You could do that flat. You can hit it more loopy. You can slice it. You can, there's different types of slice. So there's all different ways to hit the same shot. But I think when it comes to practice and how that's structured, it takes some creativity. It takes some creativity on the coach's part, where yes, there can be that novel piece, but then it's also about how can we make those fundamentals interesting and exciting and make somebody want to to learn it and to master that aspect of the game rather than than something just seeming sort of mundane, not interesting, and which tends to lead players to just maybe go through the motions.
Yeah, and I think something that's basic, Josh, that could be repetitive but needs work every day is just working on your directionals. And I don't mean just hitting cross court forehands. That's not because people tend to line themselves up to hit straight shots cross court. But if you're having a rally, just focus on, all right, if I'm moving to my right, hit it to the left. Moving to the left, hit it to the right. Just that basic stuff. So you're building in that repetition. So yeah, and can you add a little bit of interest to that? Yes, you could. Start that particular drill off with just a light serve. You could start it off where, all right, you're going to work a little bit more on the forehand directional, have the feeding player on one side and have the receiving player of the feed on the other side standing in the ad side corner. All right, she has to move or he has to move to that first ball, and then you go. Right, you can design some variations around that hopefully keep players interested in the typical, oh yeah, we just hit our cross courts, we do this, we do that. And the more interested we are, then I think that the more interesting the practice becomes, the more aware, right? The more mindful that we become. All right, so next I is on intense. So I'd love for you to give us an intro to intense.
Yeah, I mean it's I think in the word itself, but it's really, can you make sure that both mentally and physically you're bringing the proper effort, the proper sort of focused effort that you need, right? Are you bringing that intensity to each point? And that's physically, right? So things like really moving your feet or really using your legs on your serve or really, engaging your body with each shot that you hit rather than just going through the motions. And I think you could go through the motions mentally or physically, frankly. I think, physically there tends to be more signs to pick up on, right? If someone's not moving their feet. I'll go back to that example. It's generally a sign that they're going through the motions or not as intense as they could be, but also mentally, right? If somebody's checked out, if somebody's, not maybe trying to reset between points. If somebody's maybe being a little bit more on the lazy side in terms of their shot selection or decision making or things like that. If they're sort of letting these things slip without that without that attention to those areas, then I feel like their intensity has dropped. So I think, yeah, when we're trying to really design a practice, that this piece is critical. This piece is critical because it can help players, sort of get out of their comfort zone, help them stay away from that sort of complacency or just, you know, doing things sort of the same way that they always have. I think that intensity is a really critical aspect to practice being deliberate and to somebody trying to get the most out of that time that they have.
I think comfort zone is a great concept for this, to push yourself physically a little bit beyond what that looks like. Maybe not every practice, right? But certainly there are going to be some where that's true. And then maybe also push yourself mentally a little bit beyond, maybe getting you to try something, have the courage to try something there. And I think part of that, Josh, comes with, the self-talk, maybe the coach's voice. Can you have a coach's voice that's also encouraging you to just go a little bit further, do a little maybe extra today? Not tons extra, but just a little bit further. And so, yeah, of course, the word intense sort of clues us into what we mean by this. But if we get down to the mechanics of it, is you and or as the coach, you want to be pushing players on the edge of their comfort zone, a little bit beyond it, so that improvement can be had there. And of course, there may be days in which we lower the intensity because that's what the situation requires. If you have a tournament or a big match tomorrow, today is most likely not going to be your most intense day physically and mentally. It'll be a different kind of practice. There will certainly still be some level of intensity because we want it to have purpose. But I think in general, we're really looking to engage ourselves physically and mentally into the practice such that we can make some improvements there. The next I is internalize. And this is the one that makes me really think about Anders Ericsson, Josh, because in the book Peak, he describes a video that he is watching of a young girl practicing the violin. And I think, to be honest, this young student, she doesn't always do what he's going to describe. And in fact, a lot of times she's not doing what he's going to describe. But he notices that there's a period of time in the video where she's playing the violin and she stops. And it seems like she's noticing something, like something's not working. But she stops and then she tries something and she notices it. Maybe starts to maybe make some faces like she's getting a little frustrated or can't figure it out, but she keeps going. And then at a certain point, through those stops and starts, she kind of figures something out, and then is able to go on to do it. And then when we talk about internalizing, it's that ability to be aware of what's happening in the moment, and to tune into that, and then to maybe ask yourself some pertinent questions. So like in tennis, it could be, if you're working on a particular shot, is my footwork right for the shot, right? If I'm working on the forehand, I also have to be working on the footwork to make that happen. So is that right? Maybe it's, did I recognize the ball coming at me? Am I aware of where I'm standing in the court? Am I on the baseline? Am I 6 feet back? Where should I be? Am I moving to the ball? That kind of thing. Could even be super basic, Josh. Like, all right, how's my grip tension? Am I gripping it too tightly? Is it optimal, etc.? So it's a lot of like tuning in, asking some questions of yourself, and then perhaps making some adjustments based on how you're answering those questions. And I think this is this is to me a lot of what deliberate practice is. But this is using your coach's voice. This is asking, questions like that you want answers to. So a lot of time players will miss a shot. Why? Why did I hit that shot? And you're not even really asking that question. You're just insulting yourself. But this is a matter of asking questions and really tuning in and wanting the answers, and that you can work through things in the moment. This can be whether you're with a coach or a group or on your own. But it just shows like, yeah, I wanted to work on the forehand today. And all right, what am I noticing as I'm working on it? How are things going with all of that? So we'd love to get your thoughts on internalize.
Yeah, I think it all really starts with awareness, with self-awareness. And yeah, if a player can be aware of what's working, what's not working, you know, to me, I think it actually relates to the last point as well of that intensity, right? Can you be tough to make sure that you're being intense if you're not aware of what it's supposed to look like to be intense mentally and physically each point or not, right? So I think it all starts with that skill of self-awareness. And then, yeah, if we can be aware of all sorts of different things, our intensity, if we can be aware of our technique, if that's something we're trying to work on during practice, if we can be aware of, of that time that we're spending between points. If we can be aware of some of these different pieces, then we can, make the necessary changes. And I think, yeah, that self-reflection piece, being able to reflect, being able to understand what's happening and why that's happening is really key. And I think there's a piece for this during practice, and I think there's a piece after practice, right? I mean, whether after practice that includes journaling or something like that. And I think actually during practice, there can be a place at times to write things down, right? To write things down, to take note of something. You could have your process goals laid out for yourself that you look back at during a match, certainly, but also during a practice, where it's like these are some of the main things within my control that I'm trying to focus on out there today, and that could be full focus every point. That could be I want to reset. That could be that I want to be really aware of my technique on my take back and on my follow through with my backhand. Whatever it is. But I think in order to get to that point of being able to reflect, that awareness piece is sort of a critical first step to help get there. But yeah, no, I think it's a really important piece, and I think it actually ties in a lot to the fourth piece, which is being able to integrate what we've learned or what's been internalized. Because yeah, if we're I like that you brought up that point of that player saying, why am I missing this shot? Why am I playing this way today? But they're really not actually trying to find answers. But I think if we can, instead of being judgmental, if we can look at it with curiosity and really try to ask ourselves, well, why am I missing that shot? Right? Why am I maybe not playing as well today as other days? Then we can start to pick out clues. We could start to pick out clues and say, okay, well, what's actually happening here? Maybe I'm physically tight. Maybe I'm a little bit tight today. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe I have had a long day and I'm playing at 7 p.m. and I don't have 100% energy left in my bank today. And I'm more at like 60 or 70%. Right. So I think we can really be curious about what's happening, and then just really try to bring our awareness to the situation and try to learn from it, try to understand what's happening, learn from it, and maybe make adjustments based on all that.
And I think the other part of integrated as one of the four I's is matching up some of our own observations with that of a coach and having that dialogue back and forth, seeing what they are noticing, sharing what you're noticing, and I think a big part of great coaching is co-creating the whole experience and co-creating, working on the player's game, not necessarily driving the player to be someone you think they should be, but to really help them discover who they can be and who they want to be in that process. I think like in our position, Josh, we get to watch video of players, and that's an example of us integrating some of our observations with what the player is sharing. So, I'm working with a college player who a big part of his game is that, and this is we have this on his mental scorecard that he's tracking, is that he's hunting for forehands in his matches, right? That's his weapon. And so he played a recent event. I get to watch the video of it. And I noticed that, yes, there were many points in which he did a great job hunting for forehands. But there were also many points in which I felt like he was a little too complacent to hit backhands. Now, his backhand is not bad. I mean, this is a kid who's like an 11 plus UTR. So his backhand is good. It's not bad. It's fine. But there's a big difference between fine and great. His forehand's great. So I shared that observation with him, in one of our recent sessions. And he didn't say this at the time, Josh, but he was doubting what I was saying because he felt like he was hunting for forehands the whole time. So he went back and watched the video. And then he came back a week later and said, yeah, I had a lot of opportunities to hit more forehands. Like, I didn't believe you at first. Like, I really felt like I was hunting for forehands. But when I went back, I noticed that Yeah, there were many points in which I was just too content to hit a backhand. And again, the backhand in this kid's game is good, but it's not. Its purpose is it should be to get forehands, and it shouldn't be just I'm rallying with that shot, right? So that was a really great to me interaction for us that integrated his thoughts with my thoughts. He went back to the video, and then we came up with something that's going to help him be a better player, to help him recognize more of these balls that he can be taking advantage of with his forehand, and to not be so content just to hit a backhand. I'm sure you've had very similar uh, conversations, whether it's as a sports psych professional or your time at Sacred Heart as a coach. Seeing players. That's the great thing about college coaching is you're there. You're
Hmm.
right in the thick of it with them. You're seeing things from your eyes. They're seeing it from their perspective. Can we come to a shared understanding of what's happening? Maybe not only in practice, but during a match. And so I don't know if you do you have any examples, Josh, of kind of integrating a player's feedback with your feedback and coming to something better?
It's a good question. I mean, I think that, yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to this process of integration, there can be different people at play, right? I mean, there's the sports psych professional, there's the parent, there's the coach, there's the athlete. And yeah, I think a lot of it is about, can we all be on the same page here? Can we be on the same page with that feedback, with those goals, with the ups and downs, with all of that in terms of, making sure that we're all moving together in the right direction, making sure that we're integrating what is really happening out there sort of day by day and week by week because, you know, though, yeah, some athletes or parents of athletes do send me videos, and I have had the chance to watch a few of the, some of the athletes that I've worked with actually in person, but it's, I work virtually and don't get to always see people play. So a lot of it is, sort of taking people at their word or taking the parents at their word in terms of what they're saying is happening. And yeah, I think just being able to use the information that you have, whether it is video, whether you do get to actually watch in person because you're there, like a college coach or others that are, there day to day, and trying to, yeah, integrate that into making decisions, into helping that player and maybe provide guidance to that player to help them, to help them grow, but also to help them, you know, integrate these pieces themselves, right? We talk about sort of the independence that is required in tennis and how, okay, let's say, we're trying to help players build these skills so that when they're out there by themselves, they have different tools to work with. So part of that process could be, hey, if we're going back to your example, Brian, hey, I'm noticing that you're not, hunting for forehands as much as you could be, right? So then maybe that leads to that player starting to be aware of that each point, and even being able to ask themselves each point, okay, am I really hunting for forehands in the way that I could? And that leading to that self-awareness piece could even lead to them using specific self-talk, as part of their routine going into a point, right? Like something like look for the forehand or, as many forehands as possible or whatever it is. But I think again that ultimate goal is for them to be able to rely on themselves in these situations because because during their practice time and during their match time, they're really going through things in this intentional way where they are trying to integrate these different pieces and especially these different pieces into the way that they operate. So I think this last piece is really critical because it to me it sort of ties a bow on the entire process where we're able to we're able to after going through that learning process and understanding how you know understanding what's working, what's not working, what we could be doing better, are we bringing that intensity each point, you know all of these different pieces. Okay, now integrating it? Am I bringing it in? Am I making changes, making adjustments? Am I making sure that I am really operating in this new and hopefully improved way?
Yeah, and integrating it into your game, the player you want to
Yep.
become, right? Yeah,
Yep.
you're integrating your feedback, your observations with somebody else's. You've got a trusted advisor there. Yeah, and then that's the idea of the whole project is to create the best version of you out there on the court, right? So, as we're designing practices using the four I's of interest, intense, internalize, and integrated, you may adjust certain things certain days, as we mentioned earlier. So, depending on the situation, maybe a practice is a little bit more fun, a little less intense. Maybe it's a little bit more repetitive. Maybe there's a little bit more intensity on a certain day that we're pushing something. But it all should be in the service of you discovering your own best self on the court or helping your players do the same. And so I think this is a great framework just to think about in terms of day to day. How am I going to do these things? Can I plan my practice with this in mind? And I think, as you said earlier, Josh, like the third and fourth part, the internalized and the integrated pieces is really critical. I mean, I think it's very easy to come up with interest and intense, but then if you don't do the second two, right, the internalized and integrated, you're probably missing some learning opportunities there, right? So, what are your final thoughts on the framework and how people could best use this?
Yeah, I would say my final thoughts are that people can really think about how this applies to them, right? Whether it's coaches and thinking about, okay, how can I make sure the practice is designed this way on a daily basis? Whether it's athletes and saying, hey, there may be plenty of times where I'm out there by myself, right? And let's make sure that I'm trying to use these sorts of guidelines by myself, or even if I'm at a practice that does have a coach and maybe it's not always abiding by these sort of guidelines. Okay, can I do it myself? Can I make sure that I am finding some sort of interest in what I'm doing? Can I make sure that I'm bringing my intensity each point, um, mentally, physically, regardless of the score, regardless of how I'm playing, right? Can I make sure that I am, yeah, really trying to internalize things, asking questions, trying to learn from the situation. And then, with that, can I make sure that I'm integrating that into my game, adjusting, making decisions sort of based on some of these previous points. So yeah, I think, and as we talked about earlier, parents have a key role in this as well. And I think them understanding these concepts is really critical too. So I think yeah, in terms of final points, just on trying to for each person listening to try to just maybe just pause for a second and just think, okay, how can I incorporate? And I guess maybe that's another I. How can I incorporate some of these different sorts of concepts into the practice court, into that time? Because the vast majority of the time that you spend in tennis is on the practice court. Yes, hopefully people are playing matches, tournaments, leagues, things like that, and doing practice sets and practice matches and tiebreakers and things like that. But you're going to spend a lot of time practicing, as you should. But the difference between 10,000 hours of just practice and 10,000 hours of deliberate practice by really going through things in an intentional way can't be overstated. And we talk about tennis being a sport of slim margins at times. And I think how we spend, those many, many, many hours that we spend on the court, yeah, the way that we go about things during those hours can ultimately make that difference. So I think this is a really important topic. Again, we always love to hear people's thoughts, people's feedback, because yeah, every player has you know tons of opportunities to be able to practice these skills, and that doesn't mean you're going to do it perfectly every day. But I think if you're going in with that sort of goal of making practice more deliberate, more interesting, more intentional, more being able to internalize these things and then ultimately integrate them, then that's how you can, really get the most out of it.
I think that's a great wrap on the topic, Josh, and would again encourage listeners to send us questions or feedback. How maybe more details on the 4 I's in terms of how to actually do it. Happy to give everyone more ideas on that particular topic. So that is our show for today. Thank you all for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for us, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube. You can also check us out on Instagram. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership, where you can learn about the benefits of being part of the Tennis IQ podcast community. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.